President Trump firing 17 independent inspectors general at federal agencies.
The president, in the words of his people, is flooding the zone with actions, including a move over the weekend to fire the independent inspector generals across the government. Even some of his allies are suggesting he didn't do it in a way that was legal.
A late night purge overnight. Trump also reportedly fired at least a dozen independent inspector generals who serve as the government watchdogs.
The fired inspectors general were meant to serve as independent government watchdogs, a check against fraud, waste, or abuse of power.
Since Donald Trump's administration has never hidden the fact that their main objective is to install a fascist government as soon as possible, it makes sense that late on Friday night, they decided to fire as many as 17 inspectors general, whose job it is to check on fraud, waste, and abuse of power.
Yeah, so at least 17 have been fired that we know of. These are essentially independent watchdogs from different federal agencies, or kind of like checks and balances within the federal government. But the issue that's at hand right now is the way that this was done. We are hearing from some members of Congress who are concerned about the way that Trump fired these people, because what's supposed to happen is the president is supposed to give Congress a 30-day heads up that these people are being fired, and he has to give them a reason why they are being fired. That did not happen, and we are hearing that from some Republican leadership as well, including Senator Chuck Grassley, who is saying, look, we want to know why this is happening, why these people were fired, and that simply did not happen this time around.
Republican Senator Chuck Grassley is already calling on Trump to explain these firings, because he was supposed to, provide notice to lawmakers before making such a move.
Yeah, exactly, George. This was a late night purge. Sources tell us that President Donald Trump fired at least 17 inspectors generals. These are independent watchdogs charged with overseeing key agencies, making sure there's no waste, fraud, or abuse. The president is supposed to give Congress a 30 days notice if he intends to fire an inspector general. That did not happen. So this is even rubbing Republicans the wrong way. The president was asked directly about this. He said those were not his people and that he plans to replace them.
Apparently, they weren't his people, meaning they weren't proven loyalists and yes men. But he didn't seem to know who his people were either.
It's a very common thing to do. Some people thought that some were unfair or some were not doing the job, and it's a very standard thing to do.
Do you plan to bring your own people in those positions, Mr. President?
Well, they're not my people. I don't know anybody that would do that, but we'll put people in there that will be very good.
So the stable genius, know-it-all president fired a slew of nonpartisan watchdogs who are tasked with monitoring and exposing fraud and abuse of power. So this 34-time felon doesn't want people in place that reveal abuse of power and lawlessness. The obvious intent and direction that this administration is barreled towards in just 1 week in office confirms all the campaign denials of there being a plan to consolidate power and minimize, if not eliminate, the powers of Congress. And if the minion-minded Republican Party actually decides to represent Americans instead of working for an authoritarian leader, what can they really do?
So we are going to be in a situation, and this inspector general issue is one. The TikTok law is another, where Congress passed a law that said a certain thing is supposed to happen, and then that doesn't happen. So the remedies available to Congress are obviously, number one, they can do oversight. They can demand information from the executive branch explaining what happened. They can hold hearings if they want to. Normally, the other lever that Congress has available to it is the budget. Query whether in this particular situation, Congress would want to adjust budgets because they want inspector generals to be funded. And then another option that's potentially available is sometimes the House of Representatives actually brings lawsuits.
In other words, not many options that'll quickly halt this instance of lawlessness being shoved on the country by this felonious president. Have we noticed yet that based on a decade of verifiable lies and dismissals of American laws, this president has effectively convinced enough people that he, and he alone, decides what's legal and who's competent and what the consequences are of his decisions, regardless of what we experience. And any opposition to his desires are considered anti-American.
Yesterday, in the dark of night, President Trump fired at least 12 independent inspector generals at important federal agencies across the administration. This is a chilling purge, and it's a preview of the lawless approach Donald Trump and his administration are taking far too often as he's becoming president.
You heard Senator Graham just say technically he may have violated the law by not notifying Congress. Is there anything that Congress can do about this decision by President Trump?
There's a lot that we can do, and I have to say, as someone who introduced the Protecting Our Democracy Act, which was designed in part to protect inspector generals, to write off this clear violation of law by saying, well, technically he broke the law. Yeah, he broke the law. And not just any law, but a law meant to crowd out waste, fraud, and abuse. And yeah, the remedies Congress has. We have the power of the purse. We have the power right now to confirm or not confirm people for cabinet positions that control agencies or would control agencies whose inspector generals have just been fired. And let's remember, in his first term, he fired an inspector general for providing whistleblower complaints to Congress, fired an inspector general for saying the pandemic response, his response, had flaws. The American people, if we don't have good and independent inspector generals, are going to see the swamp refill. They're going to see rampant waste, fraud. They're going to see corruption. It may be the president's goal here, when he's got a meme coin that's making him billions, is to remove anyone that's going to call the public attention to his malfeasance.
Any voice that clearly states how this disregard for our laws that were created to avoid everything he bluntly says he stands for, those voices are deemed wrong because they oppose the words of an authoritarian. It's right in front of us because one of the inspectors general that he spared, Michael Horowitz, released a report faulting the FBI for surveillance warrant applications in the investigation into ties between Russia and Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. But the report also found that the investigation had been open for a legitimate purpose and did not find evidence that partisan bias had guided investigative decisions. He said, Michael Horowitz, we're keeping, calling his 2019 findings such an accurate, well-done report. These kinds of signals from people that he considers blind loyalists is the only requirement that he's interested in, and he's not even shy about it. Which is why weak Republican legislators like Senator Roger Marshall are quick to publicly drop to a knee and tell their constituents that they have no problem with a president that's prepping to waste our money and threaten our national security, all while abusing power to do whatever the hell he wants.
The president cashiered a bunch of the inspectors general who the Senate relies on for providing information to give oversight. There's some uncertainty about what's going on here. Are you comfortable with the move?
So absolutely. I think first of all, remind everybody President Reagan did basically the same thing. Look, these inspector generals have lost their way. And this is part of President Trump's promises made, promises kept. He said he was going to drain the swamp. Over the past several years, record amounts of improper payments from the federal government, $250 billion of improper payments. The inspector generals have turned from a watchdog into somebody who's protecting the agency. So he's cleaning house, he's starting over, and I think it's a great move.
And you're content that you'll get independent, fair-minded inspectors general to replace them?
Yeah, so there's no doubt there are some really good people there.
Right.
But I think when you sit there and try to sort out the good guys from the bad guys, sometimes you have to let them all go.
It's simple blind trust in one man, based on his empty declarations of what is the swamp and what isn't. So in case any supporters rub their chin and begin to wonder why a president that has had a lifetime of criminal activity would want to eliminate people whose job it is to investigate and prevent it, Roger Marshall is there to say, don't worry, he's looking out for you despite everything that he's shown us. Mark Greenblatt is one of the IGs that was fired, and his warning oddly matches up with how things actually work when someone is working hard to increase abuses of power.
So let's talk about the big picture impact of not just your job, but all of these. You say you're still sifting through the rubble. I mean, what does that mean for taxpayers if there are not people like you in these roles?
Well, I would say it's troubling. These removals should be sending off alarm bells for a number of different reasons. But the primary one, in my view, is the independence of these positions. The whole construct of inspectors general, it's based on us being independent, that we're not beholden to a political party of any stripe, that we are there as the taxpayers' representatives to call balls and strikes without any dog in the fight. So that's the question, is what will President Trump do with these positions? Is he going to nominate watchdogs or is he going to nominate lapdogs? That's the key question. If he's going to nominate independent-minded folks who are independent in body and spirit, then that's hopefully the right course of action. If he goes down a path of nominating and appointing political lackeys, then I think the American taxpayers, Congress, stakeholders throughout the country should be up in arms. This is not a good development for the American taxpayer.